Do you support raising the minimum wage? Why or why not? If the wage doesn't increase with inflation, the higher-ups are paying you less and less every year. A full-time minimum wage job should allow someone to afford being able to live in the city or town where that job is located. That's bare minimum. The fact that our society has been reduced to needing to spell that out is awful. If the wage doesn't increase with inflation, the higher-ups are paying you less and less every year. A full-time minimum wage job should allow someone to afford being able to live in the city or town where that job is located. That's bare minimum. The fact that our society has been reduced to needing to spell that out is awful. If the wage doesn't increase with inflation, the higher-ups are paying you less and less every year. A full-time minimum wage job should allow someone to afford being able to live in the city or town where that job is located. That's bare minimum. The fact that our society has been reduced to needing to spell that out is awful. Yes, it hasn't kept up with inflation, and everyone who works full-time should be able to afford food, rent, healthcare, and transportation. Raise it. A 40-hour minimum wage job after taxes does not cover rent of a one-bedroom apartment where I live. Forget about food, transportation, utilities, clothing, and, gasp, maybe something enjoyable from time to time. I think each state should raise their minimum wage based on their cost of living. People who live in the middle of nowhere in Montana, as an example, I don't know their cost of living, don't need to make $15 an hour to survive. In my area minimum wage is already over $15 an hour and it still need to be around $20 to be livable. It's a tough one. I think $7.25 is too low, but $15 is probably too high for the country as a whole. I also am concerned that businesses will just reduce the amount of hours for workers, focus more effort towards automating their jobs away. It's a tough one. I think $7.25 is too low, but $15 is probably too high for the country as a whole. I also am concerned that businesses will just reduce the amount of hours for workers, focus more effort towards automating their jobs away. Unfortunately, it won't solve the real problem. Once upon a time, minimum wage jobs were those held by high school kids or someone new to the workforce. These were jobs that required little to no training. It wasn't the typical job, it was the bottom job, and anyone in the workforce for more than a few years was making more. So what changed? Are most people trying to live their entire life working jobs that require no training? That doesn't sound right. I imagine most folks would be willing to learn skills on the job for better pay. Is it just that most available jobs require no special skills? This is a maybe. A minimum wage employee might be cheaper than automation, but automation might be cheaper than a $15 per hour employee. Was this a fear among those Amazon warehouse folks who voted against unionizing? Maybe. IDK, an employer who pays minimum wage, is saying, "We'd pay you less if we could," but also accepting a minimum wage job says, "I'll take whatever you are willing to offer." It's not the minimum wage that bothers me. It should be higher, maybe $10 per hour. What bothers me is that there are so many of these jobs. A minimum wage job shouldn't be the standard for career employment. Minimum wage should be the bottom, not the norm. The problem is that employers can get away with paying minimum wage to career employees. Why is that? How is that? That is the real problem. Raising the minimum wage won't help career employees at minimum wage. They will still be making the same as the high school kid who can't tie his shoes and takes 4 times as long to get anything done. How we solve the real problem? IDK. But raising minimum wage is definitely not the silver bullet. It just kicks the can down the road 5 years. Maybe service sector unions could do better getting involved. Unfortunately, where I live, minimum wage went up to $15. It didn't matter because the price of everything went up alongside it. pretty much. I've seen people charge $1,700 for single bedrooms, no utilities. Average without utilities included is about $1,300 for one bedroom, $1,400 to $1,500 for two. Really sad. I spent 2 years in a trade school to come out with a job in good industry at $16.40 an hour. Not bad. If they raise the minimum to $15, should I be making more then? If 2 years of specialized education does not net me much more than minimum wage, what do I do? Not much, because in all honesty, I would gladly keep working like I do at this pay even if the minimum is $15. That means my friends and family could be making $15. If everyone does better, I do better. I can put my own personal gain aside, because everyone else matters. The future is uncertain and we need to push for the best that we can make of it. You can't demand a service and then not give those people a living wage. Giant corporations like Walmart don't pay a living wage and then their employees require government assistance, food stamps, welfare, etc. As taxpayers we end up picking up the slack that corporations are pocketing for themselves. So yes, raise the minimum wage, but that action within itself is not enough. It's just easy to fit on a sign, I guess. Yes, absolutely. The whole intent behind the federal minimum wage was that this was the minimum full-time wages you needed to earn to live off of. I'm not talking about buying the latest iPhone or a $60,000 car, but enough to live above the poverty line. A lot of conservatives I know, my brother included, feel that minimum wage equals minimum skill and thus are really only meant for high school folks. Never mind the fact that it's not a high school kid serving you coffee at 6:30 am or handing you value meal at the drive-thru at lunchtime. In the end, raising minimum wage only helps people. Less government handouts and all that. It is not ideal in terms of ways to increase worker living standards since artificial price setting always creates inefficiencies. However, we don't live in an efficient market as is. Workers do not have a lot of ways to increase their earning power due to things like lack of collective bargaining and automation pretty much obsoleting a lot of people's skill sets. So in the absence of a better option, I support minimum wage increase fully. I support raising the minimum wage. Yes, I also support more workplaces transitioning into a 4-day work week. There is a lot of unemployment, but a lot of people who find themselves overworked. Aren't those very odd problems that exist together? So it's not just about income inequality. It's about labor inequality. One might explain that the labor inequality exists because some people are not skilled for certain positions, and that's fair too. But I also support tuition-free educations. What's the worst thing that could happen if we educated too many people? Seems like we'd fund into fewer issues than being undereducated as a society. I think these things are all interrelated. It's about setting up conditions for people to be more likely to succeed. To me, raising it is less important than matching it to inflation. Even if it were raised to $15/hour, in another 10 years, we'll be having this exact same conversation again. By pegging it to inflation, we only need to get enough political influence to pass it once. I'd happily agree to $12/hour matched to inflation over $15/hour with no match. I think they should, but not by a lot. Some of my friends say it should be $35, and while that is good, it will literally put small businesses out of business. Where I live it's 9.25, I think. Around there, I think it should be at least 14-15. I'd say yes to maybe 9 per hour or maybe 10 per hour, but 15 per hour is ridiculous. First of all, small businesses would not be able to pay it, and if they would, their products would substantially increase, and you would have less customers. Everything would be more expensive. I'd say if you want to earn more, learn or work hard. There is a bunch of free resources that helps you learn new skills, but you have to be willing to sacrifice a bit. I'm not political, but I believe that you and you alone are responsible for yourself. You want something? Go out there and earn it. I believe in that because I did that, so I think you can too. Yes, it needs to be tied to inflation or the CPI, ideally localized, so that you don't need to fight to raise it in the future. It's ridiculous that we need to do it this way. The problems with a minimum wage at $5 or $10 or $20 or $50 will remain the same. You can't raise the floor and expect to somehow be further away from it. The equation works like this, simplified. The price of any given item equals the cost of materials plus the cost of production. Production includes labor. So what happens if you increase the cost of production? You go from 1 + 1 = 2 to 1 + 2 = 3, and now you're pissed off that you can't make 1 + 2 = 2. Now you want to implement price ceilings, so people aren't allowed to charge more than X amount for an item. Now it's not profitable to produce this item. So what do? Cut costs, automate, cut hours, etc. If that's not enough, then what? Shut down. Unbelievable. Who are the people who can deal with cutting their profits? Huge corporations. Now you find yourself on the side of Jeff Bezos and you're helping him root out his competition. Well, Zohar, if you're so smart, then what's the solution? Stop letting these fuckers devalue your currency into oblivion. They have successfully diverted your attention away from them. The ones legitimately fucking with the value of your money because they know that your average person will automatically fall in line with the bigger number equals more value trap, when that simply isn't how it works. If you have to keep slapping more zeros on your money is dying, and we, as a people, have been complacent for so long that any real fix to the problem is going to hurt. So like junkies we keep going back to the dealers to avoid the pain, but as any former junkie can tell you, it only makes it worse in the long run. I'll be honest, I don't know one job that pays minimum wage. Located in East Tennessee, our McDonald's starts at $10 an hour and our grocery stores are from $9, $12.00. Walmart here starts at $13. I wouldn't raise it. Cost of living is gonna rise if employers do not receive a tax cut to pay more out. Only way I support it is if business recover the amount lost to pay more to their employees so that product cost doesn't rise so significantly. As a small business owner, if I pay all of my employees $15 an hour, I'll be out of business in 2 weeks. $15 is too much for some jobs. Yes, but probably not to $15. The problem with minimum wage increases is twofold. Since 1937, it has never resulted in an increase in the real wage, only the money wage. However, Nike and about 1,000 other huge companies have shown they have no problem paying human beings 10 cents per hour. So, to regulate the capitalists, you need a minimum wage, just for them to maintain. But, like most things economic or monetary policy, it's not nearly as easy as people make it sound. The minimum wage is probably one of the most necessary, and yet complex, components of economic policy and regulation. You can destroy people's lives if you get it wrong. Not every location needs the same minimum wage. With that said, yes, raise minimum wage so that the equity I hold in my outstanding mortgages rises, since the resulting wage inflation will outpace those loans. Then I'll sell the house for 10 to 15% above market value, and then the next person will do the same. Then you'll be back to complaining that cost of living is too high. Since the reason to raise minimum wage is selfish, I can be selfish too. Here's my hot take. There should be no minimum wage, period. Supply and demand for workforce should regulate wage prices. Jobs won't be able to pay less, BC people would quit and find work elsewhere. Making any money is better than making no money. Develop the skills you need to find a better job. A wage is just a trade agreement between the worker and business. If you feel you should be paid more, find a better job. Don't complain about not being paid enough when you bring nothing special to the table. You people are so fucking lazy. Newsflash, there are jobs in America that you can work without a high school diploma that will pay more than minimum wage. For example, construction workers make far more than minimum wage and often work overtime hours to make even more money. But some people are too lazy to do jobs like that, and they will be cashiers and burger flippers until the day they die, while demanding they be paid more. Sometimes the country should raise its minimum wage. Sometimes it should be putting price controls on essentials like housing, accommodation. The bottom line is that somebody working a 40-hour week should be able to afford a decent standard of living, where they can afford all the essentials and have disposable income to play with after those essentials. No, raising the minimum wage is like putting a band-aid on a stab wound. It doesn't do anything to fix the issues of the horrible living expenses that cause minimum wage to not be enough. We need massive economic reform so that we don't have to keep raising the minimum wage for people to live. Not really. It feels like a way for Amazon to backhandedly kill its competition. They can afford to pay their employees whatever. Most small business can't. I'm more in favor of fixing the reasons why minimum wage needs to be so high. But let me give you my pros and cons. Pros. People in low-skill jobs can live off of low-skill work. Drives the need for innovation in tech that would replace low-skill labor, kiosks, robotic automation, etc. The need for doing low-skill jobs with greater speed and accuracy than the human counterparts has the possibility of allowing one of the parents to remain home to raise children, as having a parent raising their own child gives the children better outcomes in life. Along the same lines, but not researched, could be more attractive than government welfare for single parents, which could drive an increase in two-parent households, which has been studied as one of the biggest factors in predicting a future free of the bonds of poverty. Cons. Some people will choose to stay in low-skill work, even those with the faculties to improve. This work is usually not fulfilling and can be a detriment to the human soul. Believe me, I know. Artificially raising minimum wage puts a burden on small businesses and their owners, who generally have very tight margins. Along the same lines, for the employee, tight margins mean cuts, benefit cuts, or layoffs, or a combination of the two priors. Cost of living will artificially rise as people's spending power is artificially inflated, leading to an eventual need to artificially raise minimum wage again. Similar to what student loans has done to university tuition, more buying power means prices inflate. It prices out businesses' opportunity to give opportunity. It'll be harder for a business to justify employing low-wage earners not looking to earn a living wage, like teens, and those looking to learn a new skill or just gain experience in a field, like an intern. Overall, it creates less opportunity to get your foot in the door if a company has to pay a person with no skills a living wage. This is why I do not support it. I believe the pros are easily achievable by reducing the government footprint in our lives, and that the cons are just another government footprint in our lives. TLDR, pros can be handled better, cons outweigh the pros. In the U.S., raising the minimum wage at a federal level would be detrimental to the majority of local economies. Things you need to consider are the cost of living in each individual area, a breakdown further than rural and urban. If the cost of rent is in the $400 range, and average utilities cost $30–80, you will see a massive increase in costs across the board with a wage increase. In addition, Small towns rely on small business owners and Walmart is miles away. The cost of lease, utilities, and employee wages at higher pay rates would not be sustainable with the number of customers in a town of under 1,000 people. All too often these laws are made by people from major cities, and only applies to those residents. Given that the majority of agriculture and manufacturing, both higher-paying jobs, are done in areas with lower cost of living, this would result in a major loss of labor force. Urban areas being consumers, they'd be forced to either pay for bailouts or imports. Minimum wage should be tied in with cost of living. If I'm living in NYC making $15 an hour, I may consider moving to WV and retiring after a couple of years, lol.